All right. Well, I think that we're getting ready to go here now. Finally. Okay. Well, yeah, we'll have to report that to Mr. YouTube and let him know that we're dissatisfied with his services. Okay. Hello. This is Close to the Metal. This is our weekly show where we talk about computing. We go in depth on different topics, and today's topic is about console to PC ports. So we're going to discuss that and why they're so bad, or maybe some of them are good. We'll get into details on it. If you're watching live on YouTube right now, we would love to hear your comments and questions as we go through with the show. So drop those in there, and I'll make sure that we get to those. I'm your host, Greg Nibbler, and to my right, we have switching up the seats today. It's a total, it's a shocker
event
for you current watchers or people who routinely watch this show. It's a bit of a shocking view right now because they have switched seats.
I'm Matt Smith.
It's Matt Smith.
And I'm Brad Burke.
Hello. All right. So let's get into this today, guys. So I'm kind of curious, just right off the bat, maybe we can just say, what is the worst console to PC port ever that you've ever played?
The worst console to PC port ever.
The worst one that you can possibly think of right off the bat. It's a tough call.
I mean, I think Arkham Knight stands
Yeah.
out. I mean, the
Arkham
game
Knight?
was either, stuttering and, having problems launching, or it was just completely broken for a number of people.
Arkham Knight.
Just right out of the gate, people bought this game and they ended up rolling back, refunding a bunch of people, giving out a lot of free DLC to try and smooth it over, and eventually they just pulled it from the Steam store for a couple months to try and fix it and make it right
And it just
again.
never got fixed.
It's better now. It's getting there. You can play it.
I don't know. I actually haven't gone back and tried that. Because it was so bad that honestly, if I ever do actually end up playing that game all the way through, I'll probably just get it on the console.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think they ever really completely adequately did it. My worst actually, this is going back a little bit, but I remember the Fable port of the original Fable being really bad. It looked just ugly as sin. If I'm recalling right, I think that was a little bit because it wasn't I don't think it came out right when Fable came out. I think it was a few years after. But there wasn't really much for graphical upgrades. And plus it's just I remember it crashing constantly. And yeah.
Well, part of the problem with that game too is
It's
that
just-
in the Xbox version, it's not open world, even though it sort of is, because each zone is very small.
Okay.
So that you don't have to and on the Xbox it was sort of this constant game of run 100 feet, turn a corner,
Yeah.
load a new area, and they didn't really fix that for the PC because
Yeah.
the PC obviously has better access to memory and storage that could have worked, and instead it was this really long loading time and then into the next section.
Let's go into this then. So what can you do about a bad console to PC port? And we've got several different things that we're going to discuss with this, talking about hardware, what you can do at home, solid state drives. We'll get into all of those things. And we do want to hear your comments and questions, so go ahead and drop those in there. Peter in the chat said Batman is the worst console to PC port of all time. Yeah, it sounds like that's a lot of people feel that way. But Matt, let's go to you here. What can you do about it?
Well, there's a few things you can do about it. The first thing you can do about it is you can be a little bit. You're gonna have to be mindful of these games as they're coming out, because we all know there's a lot of pre-order fiascos. With everyone pre-orders a game before you heard anything about it. There's not any reviews out or anything like that. That's particularly troublesome on the PC because of the PC port issues. Because a lot of these big games are made for console first. So, you got to watch out for that. You got to show a little bit of restraint, and be willing not to hit that button beforehand.
I'm going to go even further and say just don't pre-order. There's there used to be sort of an argument when games were sometimes limited and you wanted to get in on that first day for I want to assure that my copy of Halo 2 is at the store.
Sure.
But even then, that was sort of the end, I think. I remember pre-ordering Halo 2 and thinking I was getting, the metal version, and it was so cool. And I showed up at the store and there were a bunch of them just sitting on the shelf too.
Yeah.
There's no reason to pre-order a game. If you want to preload it, that's one thing if your internet's really bad, but it's worth it just to wait and just to see, especially with computer games. If you're buying something on Steam, Don't pre-order stuff on Steam.
Don't pre-order. Wait till it comes out. And
Wait till it comes out.
See
Make
what the
sure
reviews are.
good, yeah.
Make
Yeah,
sure
it
it's actually
doesn't
working.
really make sense in the digital age to do the pre-orders, which is why a lot of companies try and tie in like little content extras to them.
Hey, just a little secret here, industry secret. You can often get those pre-order bonuses afterward if you just buy the game, within a week of launch.
Yeah.
That usually those codes are included too. So.
Yeah, and but it just doesn't make sense because you get the same digital download as everyone else does.
Right.
And
It's
if
not like
you
they're
are
running
gonna
out of
order,
digital downloads either.
Yeah. If you are going to order, then at least do it through a method where you can get a refund.
Okay. So if you're going to do the pre-order.
Which Steam, which is the most popular way of getting games these days, they do refunds.
2 hours or 2 weeks. 2 hours, under 2 hours played, owned for less than 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay.
With
Then you can
acceptance.
get an actual refund on it.
And I'm pretty sure that GOG does that too.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. You might run into problems if you are trying to order something through, I don't know, like Origin, for example.
I think Origin actually has.
Their
I
policy
believe
now?
Origin has a refund.
Or if
policy.
you get it through, a retailer, you think I'm going to order it through a retailer, like that's going to save me somehow, but probably it's just going to make it a little bit worse for you. So
don't pre-order.
stick to the ones that'll will give you a refund
and stick to a refund.
The Origin's policy is that you can immediately get a full refund for EA games within 24 hours after your first launch, 7 days from date of purchase, or 7 days from the game's release date if you pre-ordered.
Okay. If you pre-ordered.
Yeah, and if you purchase a game within the first 30 days of its release and can't play it due to technical reasons, then you can request within their control. So like, oh, my system isn't good enough, isn't going to cut it. But like, in the case of a broken game, they have a refund policy in place. So.
Okay, so keep an eye out for those things, and that's one of the things you can do to help combat that. What causes a bad PC port? Let's get into that.
Well,
What's the origin of this?
yeah, it has to do with the differences between the console and the PC, and the way they're built, which these days they do have a lot of similarities because they run the same sort of processor architecture, and that does make the porting easier. But there still is some pretty substantial differences between how a console works and a PC works. So. One of the main differences is in those processors itself. The Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 have 8 cores. And they're not very quick cores. Like they're actually like pretty slow compared to a modern computer. Like a Core i5 processor is, a core on a Core i5 processor is probably several times quicker than a particular core on a PlayStation 4 or a Xbox One. So that means the developers, they have to code their game in a way that can use all these cores simultaneously as much as possible.
Yeah.
And in order to get the most performance out of the console. And that's a sort of a traditional, I think, sticking point for the difference between the PC and a console. And when they are porting over to a PC, if they're, I don't want to say being lazy, if maybe there's this, they haven't been given the resources to do as good a job, or sometimes these ports get shipped off to another developer, which isn't even the developer of the original game.
Some third party US.
Because the publisher's like, we don't want to spend the money on it. They won't go to the trouble of, re-engineering how the game works.
Yeah.
So that it can make use of fewer, faster cores rather than the many.
Okay.
Slower cores. And I think that ends up being, something that causes a lot of problems.
Yeah, and especially, it's as part of it, too, that's really helping this transition go better. A lot of times is, Unity and Unreal are sort of two of the main engines for creating and driving games. And they are actually much better at creating PC and console versions at the same time from the same code, which you still have to do a lot of tweaking and that kind of thing. But I think part of it, too, is that it's not just about, the hardware and engineering for the hardware, but I think PC gamers and console gamers sort of expect something different out of
A different
their
experience.
Yeah, and with a piece like a PlayStation game, I sort of want to put it in, and I maybe want a couple settings. Some games have started offering things like, well, I can decide if I want to go 60 FPS at the cost of resolution, or if I want to get 30 frames but like get a little better fidelity and that sort of thing. But on a PC, when I open a game, I want there to be a wealth of settings. I want to be able to tweak a bunch of different things.
You want that control.
Right, because my PC is different than everyone else's, and I want to be able to get there. So I was thinking of games like No Man's Sky when it came out for PC was sort of the game's problems aside, there were technical issues on the hardware level, and then there were technical issues on the interface level. That they used this interface where you have to hold a button on the controller when you're playing on PlayStation, and that kind of makes sense because you might accidentally bump it, so you can kind of hold and confirm, similar to what they do in Destiny, and that works well with a controller. When you use a mouse and you have to hold on a button to do it, it confused people.
Yeah.
And so people are often like, why can't I change any of the settings in my settings menu? And I had the same thing because I'm clicking on the arrow to change it and nothing's happening. So I have to click and hold and click and hold and click and hold. And it's just, there's all these
just
little
sounds
things.
annoying.
And the field of view they had sort of locked in so you couldn't get it any higher than it was initially. Then it was on the PS4, and they had to, wind that back and bring in new types of anti-aliasing and things like that. That, I think it's beyond just optimizing correctly, and part of this, like you're saying, it's not always laziness. Sometimes it's inexperience developing for the platform. Sometimes it is a lack of resources or an outsourcing of it. There's so many different ways this can come about, but it obviously takes a lot of patience and care in order to do this, that some companies don't give it at all.
Okay. Well, what are so that's kind of just some of the different reasons why this happens. And again, we're talking about bad PC or bad console to PC ports in games. And let us know your comments and questions if you have any, and put them in YouTube there. Let's go on to some different issues that may cause that. Some different things. I know Matt, you mentioned on here memory as could be one of the big issues.
Yeah, that's another example of where the architectures sort of differ, because something about the consoles is they tend to the sort of lump memory together. So, on a PC, you're dealing with your system RAM, which is your 4, 8, or 16 gigabytes of RAM that's plugged into your motherboard. And then you have your video memory.
Okay.
And those are pretty separate things, on the architecture of the computer.
Yeah.
Your video memory is doing its video memory thing. Your system memory is doing its system memory thing. But they're not communicating really closely. Whereas on a console, they'll design it so that those two are together, or even the PS4, it's that's just what it has. It has this lump of memory, 8 gigabytes of memory, that's just for everything. And so that can be an issue when you're trying to port from a console to a PC, because you have to. On a PC, you might have a PC that's got 16 gigabytes of system memory.
Yeah.
And then a GTX 1050 video card with 2 gigabytes of video memory. And actually, that's something that I think recently we've seen more and more is memory limitations. Games like Deus Ex. And these are ones that I wouldn't say were particularly badly ported or anything. So Deus Ex Mankind Divided, for example, or Grand Theft Auto 5. Another example.
Civ 6.
Well, that's not a port.
Well, no, but same thing.
So you have a lot of memory issues if you turn all those graphics details up. Because these were designed on a console for something that has this big lump of memory.
Yeah.
And then maybe you bring it over to a GTX 1050 again, which technically the GPU is quick enough, but you're dealing with only 2 gigabytes of video memory. So how do you split that up?
Yeah, it has to go somewhere.
And it's not a really easy thing to do, to just be just tell the game to split it up this way. Just put it. It's not you just put in one line of code and do that. It tends to be pretty difficult to figure out how you're going to split up all that memory. So that's something that actually I think does cause a lot of issue for these PC ports, and leads to some of the ones that are surprisingly demanding.
Sounds like it's a giant pain in the ass. It's what it
Yeah,
sounds like.
I mean, I'm not a game developer, so I can't
Yeah.
exactly speak to all the technical issues on that end. But yeah, I mean, like it could be a pain in the ass. On the other hand, it's not as much of a pain in the ass as it used to be because you are at least dealing with similar architectures on the processor side. And you know the overall configuration of the console is a lot more similar to a PC than it used to be, but yeah, there's still some pretty substantial obstacles, and games have gotten bigger and more complex as well. So
Yeah.
I'm sure that probably adds to the complexity of it.
So what about like a solid state drive or something like that? Would that?
Well, the thing about that is that neither of even the current gen consoles have SSDs in them.
Yeah.
They both run on mechanical drives. And, like I was talking about with Fable, they have to be kind of set up for this so that you often do have, like, long load times and then you run for longer. That's sort of how they do it now when you think about a game like Fallout. You don't load very often. You sort of sit there and load. Or GTA, you sit there and load. But I was pulling up, we were kind of joking about playing games on the MacBook, and I installed some games on it because I was curious. And I installed GTA San Andreas, and that's a game that I remember back on my, console took forever to load. Like, you were sitting there for like 10 minutes waiting for that game to boot up, and then you didn't have to worry about it from then on out. And this thing was like, boom, loaded right in, that SSD.
On the MacBook.
And and interestingly enough, San Andreas used to be a really bad port. When it first came out for PC, it was a really, had all kinds of issues, technical issues, the graphics settings were all bad. And over time, they've continued to update it, and they've continued to improve support and improve high-resolution support and things like that. So it just goes to show, that you can improve these things and you can look for solutions to them. And that's one of the beauties, I think, of PC gaming is that it's really easy to push out updates, and it's really easy to push out fixes to things that you might not be able to do on console.
And going off solid-state drives, like Brad mentioned, Fallout or Fallout 4, I think, is actually a great example of some of the issues that you get porting between console and PC, because the entire architecture of not only Fallout 4 but also Skyrim and sort of that sort of Bethesda game, it doesn't necessarily it doesn't really work very well with PC sometimes. You have all these little loading areas that if you had developed it for PC originally, because you can assume you might have a bigger hard drive or faster hard drive or more memory, you might be able to say you won't need all those little loading areas.
Yeah.
And sometimes also, I don't think the loading times in that particular, games based off that engine, they don't always take as much use of the solid-state drive as you might imagine when you're talking about the console, the PC. So it does help to have a solid-state drive, but it may not help as much as you would think sometimes. Okay. And I think that's true of other console to PC ports I've played. Sometimes they're just not really arranged, coded in a way that's going to take good advantage of your solid-state drive.
Okay.
Which might mean you have loading times that are a little bit longer than you'd really hoped, especially with the level of hardware you have.
Is this something that with the newer consoles that I know Xbox is supposed to have the big new release next year, rumored anyway, the Scorpio, I think it is. Are they going to go with the solid state drive in that, or not that we have to go far into that, but I'm just curious if that's down the road, if consoles are going to get up to that level.
I don't know. I mean, the PS4 Pro didn't.
Yeah.
And also, as far as the solid state drive goes, people have tested putting solid-state drives in both the PS4, the Xbox One S, and the PS4 Pro. And in none of those situations has there been a substantial increase in load times.
Okay.
Or decrease in load times. There hasn't been a real improvement. It's like there's maybe 1 or 2 seconds off of a 30-second long load time. So, and that's, caused a lot of unanswered questions about why. Is it something in the architecture that prevents that? Or is it just something in the operating system that's preventing it so that, I don't know,
it just can't take
someone doesn't
advantage
get a
of it,
competitive edge, or it's sort
gotcha.
of a bug, glitch preventing system?
Well, I was just thinking, if you are designing for tailored hardware, one of the things you're going to take into account is, like we were saying, how much can I put in the hard drive and how much can I pull out of it at any given time? And that games might just be set up to say, I can only grab this much data this quickly, so that's how much I will always grab, regardless of how fast.
Doesn't matter how much you have there. Okay. Okay. I guess I can kind of see that from the competitive standpoint.
It's also a price thing. SSDs are getting a lot cheaper, but when you're trying to sell a console for $400 and you're trying to make a profit on it, you have to really, really get your costs down.
Yeah.
And if you can save $20 per hard drive, you're going to do it because that's a lot of money to save. That's a big margin to keep up on your system.
And that's been made worse by the huge size of games, right? Because you can't like put anything less than a 500 gigabyte hard drive in a console these days and have it be reasonable. I don't know if there are any versions that sell with less than 500 gigabytes. I can't think.
Why
of
would
any.
you even want to buy it? Though?
Yeah, why would you want when a modern game takes up 60 gigabytes?
Yeah.
For a AAA release, and some of them take up a little bit more than that. I think you're gonna run out of that hard drive pretty quickly. Even at terabytes. You're looking at like 14, 15 games you can fit on there, and when you're talking about 512 gigabytes or a terabyte of solid state storage, that's like
that's a lot of money.
That's half the price
plus,
of a console by itself for a 512 gigabyte solid state drive. So that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
So it's kind of where it is. That's. I mean, probably the new consoles aren't going to go much even bigger than that.
Yeah, I mean the Scorpio's a ways out now.
Yeah.
But
and we still don't really know exactly.
But
what they're gonna be doing.
but I just don't see drive prices dropping that much in a year.
All right. Well, let's hop on to this other thing here. Now, I know you wrote down no hardware is safe, and I don't know if you wanted to talk about some examples of games.
Yeah. We can talk about some of the examples of games that have been bad ports and how these architecture issues we were talking about affect these games.
Okay.
We'll go with the classic example of Batman Arkham Knight.
Yeah.
So, this is a game that's probably, for a lot of people is the worst, console to PC port ever.
And that's what, if you're watching live, we had that question earlier. If you have your worst one ever that you want to list. Batman seems to be the predominant theme, but maybe there's another one that you think is worse. But talk about Batman.
And so it came out, and basically on every level it had issues.
Yeah.
It wasn't running well even on systems that had like 8 cores and GTX 980 level hardware, which was kind of the top of the line at the time. And it really just showed an example of how not coding it properly for PC, can just sort of doom the game. If you have a PC, with 8 cores, you would think that at least would run the game smoothly, but what you see a lot of times when you have these console ports is you see they're not using all the cores properly.
Okay.
For example. And sometimes they'll run pretty much everything on one core, which can be a common problem with a bad port. Other times they'll try and make use of multiple cores, but they'll only use a few of them to a small extent. But basically that's just is the issue of coming from the 8 slow core console over to a PC that could have a variety of different cores.
Okay.
And you don't know exactly how many it's going to have, or how fast they're going to be. And
that's true. I mean, there are a lot of variables there. A lot of factors that somebody has to try to take into account.
Yeah, and that's not just Batman Arkham Knight. One series I think has had this problem sort of repeatedly is Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah.
Grand Theft Auto 5 was a pretty good port.
That was probably, I think, the best of them
and that
so
surprised the hell out of everyone because their previous ports were atrocious. In particular, I remember that GTA 4 had really bad issues with cores. It just did not seem like it had any idea how to properly use PC cores.
Yeah.
And you really had to have a really high-end system processor-wise to run that game well, which didn't make any sense because that was a game that came out on Xbox 360. I think that was actually the platform it probably performed the best on. Yeah. And what did the Xbox 360 have? Like 3 cores?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So it didn't it didn't really make any sense.
That doesn't.
But that's what ended up happening. And so to talk about like what you can do about bad console to PC ports, one thing you really can't do is count on your hardware to get you out of trouble.
Yeah, you can't just outrun it or brute force. If there's a problem with the game, there's a problem.
There's
with
a
the
problem
game.
with the game. It's not on your end. It's the game
Yeah.
itself.
I mean, in some examples that might help.
Yeah.
A game that, again, I don't think is a bad port, but which is extremely demanding, is the Deus Ex Mankind Divided. And if you have a high-end system with like a GTX 1080 or an AMD Fury, something like that, you can run that game well at 1080p, maybe 1440p. So that'll help you out in that case. But that's pretty high-level hardware coming from the console to the PC. And part of the reason why some people have been unhappy with that game, I think, is because it just didn't look like
look
the
same.
level of improvement you got from going to the console to the PC didn't seem to really correlate to the amount of extra hardware the PC has. Now, I think it's a gorgeous game, and I think it's one of the best-looking games
Yeah, I think
on PC right now, but, like, when you're going from something that's the original PS4, which has, these, like, 1.6 gigahertz cores that are very slow, to, like, a quad-core system with a GTX 1080, you kind of expect to be able to blow everything out.
Right. But that's just not the case.
Yeah, it just didn't quite prove to be the case. So.
Well, let's kind of get down to this. Is there anything you can do about it? It's maybe to give people some advice here on what you can do to make sure that you do have the best experience you can possibly get.
Don't pre-order.
Don't pre-order.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Just don't do it.
Do not pre-order.
There's no reason to pre-order. It's not like you're having to wait in line for your game anymore. Especially on PC, you can just download a day of, or wait. And a lot of games now on Steam too. You can actually look because they will allow people to start posting user reviews before it comes out if they have a copy, if it's like a verified copy.
Okay.
So a lot of times you can check and see like, already 120 people have posted this and 4 of them said it didn't work. So you can kind of gauge.
Get an idea ahead of time.
Yeah, and for reference too, like Batman Arkham Knight, they have Steam has for user reviews overall and recent. And recently, very positive reviews. The game is like, now that it's working, people like it. There's nothing wrong with the game itself. People seem to like it, but it was just that it was, the overall review score is mixed. So, just something to look out for, especially on Steam, is people will report if they have hardware issues and take them with a grain of salt. But, if it looks like a lot of people are saying, oh, I'm having trouble running this game. Maybe
where
wait.
there's smoke, there's fire.
Wait it out, yeah.
Yeah. And one of my favorite places to turn if you're looking at a port, trying to think about whether or not to buy it, is YouTube or Twitch.
Okay. And actually watch some gameplay.
Yeah. Game streamers are a great place to get information about this. Way better even than Steam reviews, because I think that the reviews can end up being a little bit of a bandwagon a lot of times. And frankly, a lot of people who are on those sort of reviews don't really know what they're talking about.
You have to
so, like, what you
What? Somebody
want,
on the internet doesn't know what they're talking
is
about?
like a YouTuber or a Twitch streamer that is fairly well versed in computer hardware, and someone that's going to actually, maybe show you some settings screens.
Okay.
Go look for YouTube reviewers that focus on PC titles.
And
Perhaps even exclusively. Eurogamer's Digital Foundry is really good. They do a lot of really good work actually doing frame capture analysis.
Okay.
To find out, exactly how games are performing. They do that for the consoles too. So they can tell you if if a console game is meeting its frame rate target. But they also
Okay.
do a lot of PC stuff. And that's where I would turn.
All right.
Because you can't really beat that, and that'll give you an actual eyes-on idea of what the game looks like before you go out and buy it.
Okay. So look for reviews. Don't pre-order. Anything else that people can do to just kind of be prepared before you buy.
Update your drivers.
Update
A
your
lot of
drivers.
times, yeah, you can, like, game-ready drivers the day of launch or around it can, if you haven't updated your drivers in a while and you put that new game on, you might get a noticeable performance boost from that day of driver.
Okay.
And this is something that for more hardcore PC gamers, you probably already have, but if you have an older system, you really are going to want a quad core. A lot of times, the ports that come from console to PC, they end up needing to have more cores that run well because they were designed for something with many cores in the first place. So you know, a dual core processor these days is probably not going to cut it with a lot of console to PC ports. And a good chunk of video memory on your card can help, although I would caution you not to go crazy and end up with one of those like GTX 1050s that has like 6 gigs of RAM or something like that. That's, you know, you gotta practice some moderation in that. But
all right, so advice then: make sure you have a quad
core processor
core
would
processor.
definitely be helpful.
Don't pre-order. Buy where you can get a refund if you do.
Yeah.
Watch reviews on YouTube or Twitch or wherever to see somebody specifically talking about PC gaming, somebody who's knowledgeable in it. And those are kind of your best bets as far as to not buy a terrible Batman game that on a
Yep.
on
If
PC.
you don't want to, spend all night typing angry comments online,
Ooh,
practice these top tips.
I think you'd be remiss too. Another recent game I just remembered that was having a lot of issues was Mafia 3 for PC because it was locked. It was locked at 30 frames per second for PC right out of the box, and you couldn't remove that cap. But it was also, there were all sorts of really weird things like mirrors that didn't update correctly. So there were lots of mirrors would take 5 or 6 seconds to update, and then they would update. So there were lots of things.
I hate
where,
when that happens in the morning.
People would point a gun at the mirror and wait for it to update, and then turn around. So it was like they were pointing a gun at the back of their own head. Like we've had mirrors down since like N64. There's no excuse for that.
Right. Okay, so watch out for that one then. Don't get Mafia 3.
Don't get Mafia 3 for PC.
All right. Well, I think that's probably about it. Any final comments that you guys want to dish out on this? On the console to PC fiascos?
PC is the best platform.
Yeah,
so,
PC is the best platform. That's what you're going with. All right, well, there we go. Let us know your comments, too. If you're watching this video or listening via podcast, you can always email us, podcast@digitaltrends.com, or leave your comments on there. If you have a topic that maybe you think that we should cover, let us know, because we do this show every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, right here out of the Digital Trends offices, and we'd love to hear your feedback. So go ahead and do that. We'll be back here next week with another episode.